Welcome, everyone, to More Than Just a Veteran. My name is Kat, and I'm excited to bring to you all today a very special edition in honor of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I have with me here Miss Amy Lutz from the St. Louis Kaplan Folkman Holocaust Museum. And I'm so excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting.
So I recently discovered your guys' museum. Actually, in my work as a grad student at the Citadel, very passionate about the Holocaust, and also will be doing my thesis on the minorities of the Holocaust. And so I just kind of want to pick your brain today and just let people know what's out there. So tell us about how the museum got started, and just give us some history and background.
That's a great question. So we actually were in our 30th year of operation, although the kind of Holocaust Education Center as a group has been around for many decades here in St. Louis. But the museum was originally opened officially in 1995 as the St. Louis Holocaust Museum and Learning Center. We've changed our name a couple years ago, and the museum here was actually an effort of a couple different entities and forces. Number one, we used to be a part of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, so they were a major part in our founding. Number two, St. Louis had, she recently passed away, but for many years had one of the most preeminent oral historians. Her name was Vida Prince. Lived here in the area, and starting in the 1970s, which was very early in Holocaust education, she started doing oral histories with Holocaust survivors, and so we had all that material. And so between the community and the community of Holocaust survivors here in St. Louis, they came together and built this museum starting in 1995. Now in 2020, actually, a little bit before 2020, we had decided it was time for a facelift, so to speak, in museum speak, and went through a renovation for 2 years. We actually meant to close in June of 2020, but actually closed in March of 2020 when everyone else closed, and then reopened to the public with a new museum, based upon the same history and the same people and the same, survivors as before, but reopened in November 2022. And now we are open and operating here in Creve Coeur area, Missouri. We're actually in the county, ironically off of Lindbergh Boulevard. And we're very lucky to be in a state where we have a lot of support from the community, and we actually have a lot of student visitors. So we're very busy in a very good way.
Wonderful. And for those of you who are not aware, there are a ton of oral videos out there online on YouTube. I think it's Shenandoah is one of the major.
The Shoah Foundation.
Yeah, yes. Of course, the Holocaust Museum from DC has a ton, and even the World War II Museum has put up. There's a lot out there because obviously there's very few people left from that time period, and so it's really incredible. So, do you guys have that on your website, or where could they watch your guys' material?
Great question. So yes, we have something called the Oral History Project, which was a Vida Prince creation. It's at stlholocaustmuseum.org, and we have over 140 oral histories from survivors and witnesses and liberators from the St. Louis area. And we're working on really just expanding that and digitizing actually our entire archives to accompany that. But right now, all of that is on our website.
Wonderful. In case you missed that, guys, you can check in the description on the YouTube box. It will also have that link there as well as their museum link. Okay, so let's talk about St. Louis. I didn't know until I went and did some research here in Springfield, Missouri at the Wilson's Creek National Battlefield that St. Louis was a very heavy populated of a lot of immigrants from Germany and just, I think, Romania, a lot of the different areas. And so tell us some just stories that can kind of help us, relate and get to know some of those people that have now, passed on that we may not know about. Some just unique stories of the St. Louis area.
Yeah, that's a great question. So to add a little bit of additional context, a lot of people ask, why did a lot of Holocaust survivors come to St. Louis? We've actually identified almost 1,000, over 900.
Wow.
Louis. And the big question is, yes, you're correct in that there was a large German-speaking population here in the area, but obviously a lot of survivors came from Poland and Czech Republic and Lithuania, came from a variety of different places. But one of the big reasons we had so many survivors come here is because we had a pre-existing Jewish community. And so when people came to the United States and didn't know anyone, didn't have anywhere to go, they typically were sent somewhere where they could get resources from a local community. And since we had a pre-existing Jewish community that was pretty successful here in the St. Louis area, that's why we had a lot of survivors come to St. Louis. And so, we have some. Let me think of some good stories. So, like I said, it's over 900. It's about 960 something we've identified. There's probably more that we don't have records for. One of the stories that comes to mind is Gus Schoenfeld. So Gus Schoenfeld, if you've ever been to our museum, many of you listening probably have not, but just to add some context, we have this class photo at the front of our museum when you walk into the first gallery, and it's a Hebrew school class. Gus Schoenfeld is the little boy in the front of it. It was taken in 1920s, 1930s, and Gus was the only person that we know who survived that photo, and it's a photo of 20, 30 people. Gus survived the Holocaust, was in camps, came to St. Louis, got married. But I bring up Gus's story because actually it brings in some interesting context, because Gus actually he was the head of the medical school at Washington University in St. Louis. He was a very prominent doctor. He was very involved in the research into statins, into things like Lipitor and medications that lower cholesterol. And so I bring up that story because it makes me think, he had this horrific experience in the Holocaust and survived, but he was the exception. And he did this incredible research and saved people's lives. My dad is on that medication, so helped people's lives. But then you think about all those other kids he went to school with and all the people that he knew who could have lived these wonderful lives, and the people and the experiences and the inventions and all the things that we were denied. It really brings it home. 6 million people were murdered during the Holocaust, but we don't think about, or 6 million Jewish people, we don't think about the children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on that were never born because they were never allowed to be born. So that's why we like to bring up Gus's story. We have very few survivors who still speak. We're actually very lucky. Rachel Miller was a survivor from France. She is still very much alive and energetic. She's in her 90s. And she has an interesting story in that she was sent in hiding with some friends, with a convent for a short period of time. She moved around a little bit, but she and her sister her sister Sabine were meant to go hide together, but her sister stayed back with her aunt because her aunt was going to buy her a purse or something very exciting. And unfortunately, because Sabine stayed back, she and the family were deported and first taken to a French collaborationist run camp, and then later to Auschwitz, and she passed away. And so Rachel speaks, like I said, Rachel was a hidden child. She survived the war, came to St. Louis. But it's just that difference of a day that always hits you, that her sister would have survived if, those little pieces of the little choices that we make where we never know the impact. So we have lots of, those are two very brief stories, but we have so many of these, and that is really what our museum is based on.
Awesome. So for those of you who haven't seen any pictures or gone inside the museum itself, let's talk about the amazing artifacts you guys have there. And I'm really excited about in the future coming up and doing that and getting some of that stuff on archive. But tell us some of what you would find when you walk into your museum and what is all there to do.
Good questions. So we're very lucky in that a lot of the artifacts, not all, but a lot of the artifacts on display are ones that we received from survivors and their families. Because the backbone of our museum, something you'll see, are the St. Louis survivors and Missouri survivors. We actually, in Springfield, I'm going to give her a shout out. Erica Schwartz is a Holocaust survivor who lives in Springfield, and she's actually coming to St. Louis for a presentation in April. But I bring her up because we obviously focus on St. Louis survivors, but obviously there's a wider community of survivors who are represented in our museum, either from outside of Missouri or within the wider region. But you'll see a lot of photos of survivor families before and after the Holocaust, which is really contextualizing the loss of the people who used to be here and were not. We have, so our museum is kind of in 2 or 3 parts. We have the chronological history of the Holocaust. We have this really neat interactive map where you can see the expansion of what the Nazis called the final solution throughout Europe. It's really a one-of-a-kind piece we have. And then we have something unique in our museum, which is a section called Roles and Perspectives. And a lot of museums end at 1945. The Holocaust is over. End of story. Blah blah blah. We don't. We have this other additional section that talks about the different roles and choices people made. So people could be collaborationists, they could be bystanders, they could be resistors, they could be perpetrators, and the roles people played were fluid. You know, you can't put people in one box. And so that's a section where we highlight the complexity of choice, because the Holocaust was the product of choices. It was a product of millions and billions of different individual choices. And none of us here individually can stop genocide. We could even get a group of 30 people. We're not going to stop genocide on our own. But this section really contextualizes. I can't do that, but I can call out a comment I hear. I can be kind to someone who's being excluded. I can do all these different things. And so our museum does that. And then we also have a special exhibition and something we call an impact lab, which is a place that brings kind of the lessons of the Holocaust into contemporary times. So we have these 3 different sections that people are able to meet, to visit.
That is incredible. That sounds like that's another person I'm going to have to try to find to interview in my backyard. Holy cow, I had no idea. That's what I just love about education and history. You learn so many things you don't know. Um, all right, and also one of the great things about your guys' museum that I've noticed is you guys have a very active calendar. So share some things on the. Let's start first with the educational side. What all do you guys offer education wise for the public?
Oh my goodness. So, you know, I'm a historian by trade, but at the museum, I'm the head of the marketing and communications. So everything you're seeing, it's me painstakingly posting all of these. Yeah, so we're very lucky to have a really good program schedule for all ages. You know, so from a you know younger level, we offer museum tours and opportunities for students to come in to get a tour of the museum, to maybe hear from a survivor or descendant speaker, to do a variety of different things. But for the public, I think as you're seeing and alluding to, we have in the spring, we kind of have 2 bookend programs, might be the best way to say it, is January 27th, as this podcast is about, is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We have a whole weekend of programs. We have a 4th generation descendant. He's very young. He's in his early 20s, giving a presentation about his great grandmother. We're reading the names of Holocaust survivors online and in person all day. And then in April, we have something called Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah is another Holocaust Remembrance Day, but it's primarily the religious variation. It's for the Jewish community. And so that's something that we will be doing at a local synagogue. And I bring up Erica Schwartz from Springfield because she's actually our keynote speaker for Holocaust Remembrance Day in April. And then between that, we have book talks. We've actually been doing a lot of film screenings. We're screening the film Exodus this spring. I mean, we have something almost every week at the museum, and we schedule and plan our program so that we have something that appeals to everyone.
Wow, that's wonderful. So, as some people may be aware, a lot of people think, as far as the United States is concerned, that the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is really the only opportunity they have to see things, which is phenomenal in itself. And if you do have the opportunity to go there, I recommend you do nothing else for the day but go there because it's very heavy. It's a lot to process. No matter where we go, it's a lot to process. And saying that, what some things come across to your mind that separate you guys from that museum? What do you feel is unique about your guys' museum?
One question. Couple things, and some things I've alluded to. Yeah, I mean the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is the giant, I mean this in the nicest way, monstrosity of a museum because they have so much history to contain, and they're a huge museum. It's a very heavy museum.
Yes.
It's done extraordinarily well. We at the St. Louis Kaplan Folkman Holocaust Museum are one of about 20 Holocaust museums in the United States. One of the many reasons, there's a whole history of this, but one of the many reasons there's so many Holocaust museums in the United States as opposed to other countries, you know, a lot of countries in Europe who experienced the Holocaust only have fewer museums than us. One of the reasons is because we have a lot of Holocaust survivors who came to St. Louis, or came to St. Louis, but also came to the United States after the war. And that is something that makes our museum unique, because this museum tells the story of the Holocaust through the voices of these local survivors. And so it's not just, hey, here's what happened. You know, we have the just dry history text, and we have that context. You have to include that in any museum. But in each section, when we're talking about ghettos, when we're talking about camps, we're talking about different aspects of the Holocaust, we include the literal voices of people who experienced it. So sometimes those are audio headsets that you bring and you listen to. Sometimes it's quotes on the walls. Sometimes there's actually video testimonies. So that's something that makes us unique. I would also say our Impact Lab that I mentioned earlier is really one of a kind. So the Impact Lab we actually just opened. Well, we opened it a couple years ago, but we just made it open to self-guided experiences. Before that, you had to schedule a tour, or you had to. It was a little bit more.
Right.
But the Impact Lab you can visit during our open hours, and it is a section that really actually takes our museum's mission, which is we use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to reject hatred, promote understanding, and inspire change, and then puts that in action. So there's 3 different sections in it. There's one where you witness the stories of people who have experienced genocides and hate crimes throughout time, not just the Holocaust. There's one section about something we call the spiral of hate, which shows how things like stereotypes and prejudice can spiral into genocide, because as we talked, none of us individually can stop genocide. So that section tells you about how can we push back against stereotypes, because that's much easier for us to do as individuals. And then there's another section that really gives people concrete opportunities and to listen to scenarios, to learn how to fight back against hate and prejudice and bias and cruelty and all these kind of things in their daily lives. And so that's something that's really neat to our museum that people can visit, because it takes those history and lessons of the Holocaust that we have in our permanent exhibition and brings them to today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so I think that most everyone's got some great information and activity, and with permission, I'm going to share a video here at the end of this podcast of the museum and a little more hands-on, as if you're inside the building. And one of the last questions that I like to ask my guests whenever I have them on is kind of a two-part question, and feel free to take your time. First part of that would be, what can we do to keep history alive?
Oh, that's a big question. So I'm actually going to go back to some of the themes that came up in this interview, which is, okay, me as an individual keeping history alive, that's a big job. Neither you nor I can do this by ourselves. And so I would say break it down to what can we do individually to make a change, because that's all we can do. I can't change you, you can't change me.
Right.
I would say, number one, people who are not interested in history, I think perhaps think of history, they've been taught history in a certain way, that it's, for understandable reasons, it's memorization, it's dry, it's just information. There is something in history that interests everyone. So I would say, number one, if you're not interested in history, I'm guessing most people listening to this are, is to find an incident, a time period in history, a person in history that interests you. And one of the things that I learned in grad school is that there's a history to everything. And you start there. I mean, there's a history to, oh my goodness. I mean, literally, I read a whole book in grad school about the history of like hygiene and cleanliness. And so every one of us has a passion. There's a history to that passion. So I would say start there by educating yourself. And then, which in the end of the day is really in many ways all you can do, but find ways to share that history if you're really passionate about it. Start a podcast, work at a museum, post it online. I would start there and just think about what you individually can do to learn history and learn it well, because I'm also an expert on misinformation and disinformation. You don't want to share incorrect history. Start by learning it yourself and then finding small ways that you can share it with other people.
And also another great tool is social media. Go to their museum page, hit boom, share. 3 seconds. It's credible resources, and it takes very little for you guys to do.
Doing my job for me. I appreciate it.
Well, as content creators, we kind of know what the work is and the power of it as well. And one of the things that I wanted to mention that I come across quite often, having a passion for this, is that a lot of people think that the museums are just showing graphic, really hard, horrible material. And it's a fine balance of, we don't want to take away from a place of honoring of what happened versus it being too graphic. And I recently did a lot of research at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and they've just recently added the Liberation Building, and it has a section of the Holocaust. And I was really impressed with, even though it's something that I know how to manage with my mental health it's not always easy for everyone else. And it is a very hard topic. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how that is very sensitive nowadays for trauma and trigger, or just triggers in general, is such a hard thing. So I just wanted to put it out there that I don't know really how to define it, but that it's not just graphic Schindler's List material, have you? If that is the appropriate way to say it.
It's a very incisive point that you're making in that many institutions, including ours, are very sensitive to the imagery we use because
Yeah.
there's different ways that you could go. You could go the full shock and awe where it's all graphic imagery, but we
Yes.
know from we do not do that. And in fact, yes, we have some graphic images, but we're very mindful of we
Yes.
try not to show too many faces up close because of just honoring the person who has died. I mean, if you hate to think of it this way, but if that was a family member of yours, would you want them to be on a museum wall? And so you show the
Thank you.
scope. So we focus on showing the scope rather than here's an individual person because we want to respect the people who were not respected by the people who murdered them. So this is the least we can do by honoring that. And so we try to be very mindful of the limited graphic imagery that we use it sparingly, and also a lot of it is hidden away in drawers. You actually have to physically pull it out to look at it. And so it's not going to shock. You're not going to walk around a corner and see something. But yes, I mean, I would say, we know, and it sounds like you've done some research on this, is that certainly there's people who disagree, but again, that shock and awe, the scared straight kind of thing doesn't work. And so that's a big reason why our museum not only is mindful about graphic imagery, but we focus on the faces of people, who were victims and also survivors, and tell their story, who they were, rather than obviously we don't shy away from the devastation, but we talk about what the devastation means, what it meant for a liberator to see it, why they took photos of it, because it wasn't just, hey, here's graphic imagery. They took photos of it because they thought people wouldn't believe them. And
Hmm.
so, we focus on a variety of other aspects rather than just the shock and awe, which can turn people off. And so I would say people interested in visiting our museum, yes, it's a graphic content and graphic imagery, but there are ways to experience our museum without being completely overwhelmed.
Right. Great answer. Took the words out of my mouth. um, and so you've addressed already about education and what people could do with their teachers in that area, or even just online. They could integrate that into their curriculum, into the classroom sessions. But part of the second part of the in question I have is, as a citizen and someone who's not, maybe connected into all of that, how can we help the younger generation? How can we help them see that?
That's a good question. So I have a couple answers, both as someone who works at the museum and also a scholar on my own. I think let me say two things. Number one, we're very lucky in Missouri and in Illinois that we do have a mandate for Holocaust education, and so students at public schools are required to come to our museum.
Wow.
And so, there's part, so there's kind of the aspect of work with your local legislators to make sure history is being done, that kind of piece, which we've done. But I also want to go back to the theme of not everyone can contact legislators, and we all have our own individual power, and sometimes we're limited in what we can do. For younger people, I would say a couple things. I think number one, our education team does a really good job of knowing how to talk to a fifth grader and knowing how to talk to a 12th grader, which is very different. I would say there's lots
Yes.
of institutions like ours. I would say if you're a parent or someone listening, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do about my kids, my niece or nephew. How do I talk to them about this? We literally, that's what we do for a living. So I would contact institutions like ours or other museums that deal with this difficult history. Now, kind of as an individual, though, I would say, in my experience, I taught college kids when I was in grad school, so that's quite a bit different. But in my experience, sometimes you have to equip younger people with the tools to experience this history before
Right.
you show them the history. And what I
Right.
mean by that is taking a fourth grader into the Holocaust Museum, here it is going to be overwhelming. They're not going to
Mhm.
understand. They're not going to have the tools to understand. This is how people interact with each other. So I would say some of it with younger people is actually just not softly, but gently introducing them into the concepts behind this history, which is, here's the choices we make when you're on the playground. and someone is being mean to someone else and you're not stepping in, that means you're a bystander and kind of jumping in, and then you bring it out. So I would say for younger kids, you kind of ease them into it with some examples, with some understanding the concepts before you talk about the history, and then you build it from there. Once kids are in high school, they're going to be able to understand much more complex things. I would say with the museum, you talked about social media. Depends on what social media platform you're on. I think there's different ages of people. You are utilize different types of social media, but I would say museums like ours also have really good resources for this, and not to promote ourselves, but that's literally my job. We're launching something called the virtual classroom at the museum really within the next couple weeks. Some of it is actually already on our website, and this has been a 3-year project for me.
Yes,
I videos, very, very knowledgeable about them, and those videos are made to be introductions to what we do. So I would say if you're looking for a specific resource, I would start there. One is on an overview of the Holocaust, but we also have one that I did on media literacy. We have one on we have one on anti-Semitism. And so I would say those are really good resources to kind of start a conversation.
Yeah, those online virtual classrooms, I was blown away before I started getting into all this. And a lot of the museums now have all these great like flashcards and just different. It's incredible, guys. So check it out. All right. Well, I could sit here all day, but I just want to say thank you for coming on. And on a personal note, something that I definitely feel has been a calling and a connection in my life is that I was actually born on January 27th.
Oh, wow.
And so I've be doing a fundraiser with the QR code in the bottom of the screen if you want to click it. All the donations this month of January will go to your guys' museum, and I'm honored to help out. And I can't thank you enough. And everyone, the biggest thing you can do right now to make a difference is hop onto social media, grab their pages. They're down in the description box, and just click share. It doesn't take much, but to each one, teach one. That's what we're going to do. And just reminder, everyone, just remember freedom is not free. It has been such a great pleasure to interview you today, and thank you so much for your time. Shalom to you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, there you have it, guys. What a phenomenal just episode, and great thanks to the museum for their time, for their permission for copyrights and archives and pictures and videos. And please, the best thing you could do is just share this message. Genocide is real, hate and fascism is real, and we can't just sit around and expect anyone else is going to do the job. We got to be good stewards of peace ourselves. So thank you for watching. This has been More Than Just a Veteran, and stay tuned to our page for our next episode. All right. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.
More Than Just a Veteran is currently seeking heroic veteran stories to share. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at More Than Just a Veteran. God bless you all, and let us never forget that freedom is not free. This podcast is dedicated to the beloved CW03 Lionel W. Lanou, laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery, Arlington, Virginia.